right. Great. I'm ready when you are.
All right. I'm so excited to introduce Laura Garnett today. How I found out about Laura was through her book, The Genius Habit. It just like revealed itself to me at the library one day, and I was immediately really drawn to it. And it was the first time that I understood really what the word purpose meant. Like it was revealed to it was like described to me through the book in a way that really made sense. And I knew I really wanted to have Laura come on and basically share her story with everyone else, and how she came about it, and really what does it mean to work in the zone of genius and find your passion and purpose at work. And a lot of times people think like, oh, I don't like my job, so I must like hop to a new job, and like I just need to find that perfect job. And it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, which is
Mm.
um, something that I think, especially in 2021, has been like a huge question on a lot of people's minds. It's like, oh, what am I really good at? What is like the intersection between like what I can do for the world, but also I enjoy doing and it plays to my strengths. So yeah, that's why I really wanted Laura on the show. And so welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Laura, can you just tell us, very briefly, what it is that you're an expert at and how do you help people?
Yes. Well, I'm an expert at really helping people tap into and be who they are. And as a result of doing that, I can help people achieve their performance or life goals in half the time they expect.
And how did you start doing this work? And like, what was your motivation behind it?
Again, it's always fun to talk about these things, but really, and I wrote about this in the book, but it came from a part of me having an experience where a part of my life, and at the time that was my career, where things were just not going in the direction that I wanted, and I went seeking answers, and that the situation was I was working at Google, and this was back in the heyday of Google, so in 2007, and where Google was the place to be. But it was a really strange situation to be working there and end up having one of the worst jobs of my life, and then blaming myself for that, and then working like crazy to try to be better. I thought I was the problem, not the job, and ending up just really kind of hitting a wall of getting sick and burning myself out, and saying, I need to solve this. How do I fix this? How do I go about finding a job that's an extension of what I'm best at, and could even begin to give me something like purpose, which I'd had great jobs. This was prior to working at Google. I'd been at Capital One, so I'd been in the corporate world for about 8 or 9 years, and I had yet to experience this concept of purpose at work. So I went, seeking answers, and went on this journey of trying to, solve it for myself. And I ended up quitting Google, getting another job, kind of making all of the same mistakes yet again. And then the 2009 financial crisis hit, and I got laid off from that second job. But at that point, I'd already realized that I had repeated a pattern of getting another job that was a bad fit. And so that's kind of where this work really began, because I said, I'm not going to get another job. I'm going to create a job that's an extension of who I am and solve this, finding work that I love, not only for myself, but for others. And that was really the beginning. And that was 13 years ago.
I love that. The I'm going to create a job that's an extension of who I am. And I totally resonate. And I think so many of our listeners also resonate with like when you're in a job and it doesn't really feel like a good fit and it doesn't really feel purposeful to you, it can be very easy to think that I'm the problem.
Yes.
Um, Definitely have been there before. And one of the things I that kind of really was mind blowing for me in your book was the way in which you talked about your purpose. So one of the
Mm,
things, so you call it, you said that in your book that your purpose is informed by your core emotional challenge. And that was a phrasing that I have never heard before because like you said, I was also working in the corporate world for like 5 years, and I remember thinking like I feel like we're doing purposeful things here, but I
mm,
don't feel like there's purpose for me. And you made this really interesting differentiation between personal fulfillment, like that you can find endless motivation if you have personal fulfillment versus like I guess like societal fulfillment, or something like that. Can you speak more on that and core
yes.
emotional challenge and what that is?
Yeah. Well, look, when I started doing this work or building my dream job from scratch, and at first it was kind of trying out a lot of things. But all along, I dove into the science, the psychology, and the neuroscience of success. Now, that was the research that was available then, 13 years ago. And, I read a lot about, what is it that really creates great performance? And, again, it was these two data points, challenge or engagement, and intrinsic motivation. And I really dove deep into these concepts and said, okay, well, if you just need to be challenged intellectually and you need to be intrinsically motivated, these are two very simple, they seem like conceptually easy to create, or let's go get challenged, but yet so few people experience that. And I think specifically with the intrinsic motivation, and so I did, one of the things, which was just to start questioning why that was, but also to try to find this in myself. So I always started with myself, and then the work kind of came from that. And when I realized and read that intrinsic motivation was energy and motivation that came from within, it clued me into the fact that this had something to do with who we are. This was connected to our psychology in a way that was probably unconscious and that we were unaware. And I'll never forget the moment where I saw, and I came up with the terminology core emotional challenge because that's really the only way I could describe it. And I was at the gym, and I was watching the Oprah Winfrey show, which at the time that obviously dates the situation. And I was working out, and I was really trying to figure out like, what is this inside of me that gives me endless motivation? And there was something, Oprah was interviewing a guest, and she was talking about not being understood. And the way the guest was talking about not being understood, I burst into tears. And I thought, oh my gosh, there is something really, really intense there for me. Something about not being understood just hit me in a way that I've never experienced before. And again, I was in this mode of like, what is it that's going to create lots of information? I had also been tracking on the side. Okay, what are the moments where I feel very motivated or intrinsically motivated, or I feel like the impact is really meaningful to me? And that moment of crying was kind of all of the data coming together in once, and I realized, oh my gosh, this not being understood is something that deeply uh, I feel for. Like that is something that I've experienced. And yet when I kind of married it with the data that I was tracking, which was I was so I had these meaningful moments of helping people understand themselves, that's when it all came together. And I went, oh my gosh, there is this connection. And I started then going and looking for this same connection in clients. And it was always there, which was your greatest pain is connected to your greatest joy. And then I started thinking, well, what can I call it? And and again, this is very, very related to the personal growth space. Some people would say it's wounding. I had gone through therapy before, but my therapist had never really, she had not kind of fed back to me this wounding in such a concise way that allowed me to then take that and use it as a way, as a tool for creating great moments, but also as a tool for being able to unravel those moments where I felt anxious or upset. So that's really where it was born. And core emotional challenge was, in my mind, a great label for it. And I have found that, similar to the way I reacted to seeing it for the first time, which is burst into tears, that's often the reaction I get with clients, because it's a moment of kind of seeing yourself, the inner world of yourself, in a way that is so true, but you've never seen it before.
Wow, wow. That's so that's so resonates me so much, Laura, when you said that you burst into tears when you heard that guest talk
Yes.
about how they weren't understood. I teared up when I was reading your book and hearing your story about all, not feeling seen or and heard,
Yes.
because it's very, very similar. I was like that was the first moment that I was like, what's interesting is that you noticed this is what's triggering an emotional response for me, and you didn't just like let it go or like try to ignore it. Like you actually used it as data. I found that so cool that you're like, maybe I can use this information. And then you were tracking, you mentioned tracking other areas when you were doing something you felt really meaningful. And that led you to discover what is that thing that made you feel a sense of personal fulfillment.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting about that, and that's also something that's connected to my genius. So, what intellectually engages me, what challenges me, is seeing patterns in data. Now, the purpose piece is what I'm trying to do as a result of synthesizing and seeing patterns in that data, which is to understand. So, what I've realized about myself, and again, there's no greater joy to be able to help others realize this information about themselves, is that tracking is one of the most powerful tools that I can use in order to get the data I need to be able to use my genius in the most effective way. So data, and it was funny because when I started on this path, I was just tracking without thinking about it. And then when I had the realization that, oh, it's connected to my genius, it just validated this part of myself that I had never really truly owned or um, called out, but it was always there. Like, I'm obsessed with wearables. When my daughter was born, I set up a tracking system for her wakings every time she woke or went to sleep, every time she went to the bathroom. And I literally have, I think, like 10 notebooks filled with data that I was capturing on her that allowed me to kind of better manage her life. And yet it's funny because other moms would see my notebooks, and even my own mother would laugh at me and say, "What is that? That must be so time consuming." And I honestly was always like, it is so joyful for me, because I would just go through these notebooks and have all of this data, and I could go back to, 5 months, earlier than when we were at the moment, and go, oh, this is when she was sleeping then and then. And anyway, so tracking is something that, I've learned is who I am, and I embrace it. And I've had people make fun of me for it. I've had people try to encourage me not to do that, because it seems in their mind not useful for them or a waste of time. Whereas this is the journey of knowing yourself and being who you are. I will always track, and I love it. I embrace it, and it's a fundamental core component to the Genius Habit, as you know, having read the
Yeah,
book.
I love that it's so interesting too, because when you say like all the tracking and all of that, I like tense up hearing about it. So like that's probably not my zone of genius, right? And
Exactly.
it was so, but I feel like that's like a really good sign when other people like are uncomfortable with what you're doing, but you're like, that's so odd because I really like doing this.
Yes, and that in itself is one of the most important aspects of the journey to yourself and being who you are, is acknowledging the things that are joyful and exciting no matter what anyone else thinks, and owning that versus being quick to um divorce yourself from it or give it up or, gloss over it or think, oh, maybe this thing that I do isn't that valuable because no one else thinks it's valuable. When for me, if I just stopped tracking, then I wouldn't be as effective. My genius not be as would not be as strong as it is with that data because I need data, and tracking is a way that I can get data from nothing, and it's wonderful.
I love that. And tying, connecting the dots back earlier, you mentioned that there's like two parts. The one is the challenge and engagement, and then the second part is intrinsic motivation. So what you were
Yes.
just talking about using the data, is that the challenge and engagement part of the equation?
Yes, that's the genius. So, again, the zone of genius framework
Mhm.
was is really a framework that I developed to be this cheat sheet for great performance. And again, based on the science and the research that I did, these two data points of being challenged intellectually or engaged. Engaged is kind of the buzzword in the business world, and intrinsically motivated. If you have both of those things happening, there's no way that you're not doing great work. But once again, most people don't know exactly what it is that keeps them challenged and engaged intellectually, and they don't know what provides intrinsic motivation. And so that's why that's where the genius and the purpose was born from the zone of genius, which is know your genius, know your purpose. Then you can create challenge and engagement and purpose whenever you want. You can be proactive with it once you know it. And so, yes, it's really important to intimately know, and that's why I always provide for my clients and for readers, give them the tools to be able to create language and
Yeah.
labels, put language to it. That way, you're able to communicate it more effectively. You're able to see it. You're able to manufacture it if it's not there.
Yes.
All of these things.
I love that. Love that. And for our listeners, if you go to Laura Garnett's website, which I'll include in the show notes, she has a tracking tool for like everything.
Yes.
I did use one of them. I did it for a few weeks, and it really helped me understand like where in my current work I was like shining best in. And it also led me to start this podcast. Actually,
Beautiful. I love
because
it.
yeah, one of the things I realized is the being seen, being understood part was
Mm.
definitely an intrinsic motivator for me. And one of the things I love doing is taking other people's stories and sharing them and really helping people find belonging
Mm.
in their part in the world. And so I really would just want to thank you for that, for like helping me take that step and basically having more like deliciousness in my life now because of that.
That's amazing. Well, I would say I created a tool to help you do that for yourself. That's what's
Yes.
really powerful is that you were able to see what that step was, and then you had the confidence to actually take it.
Yes.
So that is, I will turn that back and congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really curious, Laura. Why do you think most people don't know what their flavor of engagement or their intrinsic motivation is? Why do you think that's such a hard thing for people to just know?
And I think this is such a big, that's such a great question because, we're essentially not taught that who we are is something worth exploring, which exploring, understanding, continually unraveling. And I find that very unfortunate because, again, if you go to the science of the science of success and happiness, at the root of all of that is who you are. And yet it is still not a course in college. It's not, taught in high school. And it is fundamental to all of these things that, everybody wants. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to have a career that's meaningful and engaging. And everybody wants relationships that are fulfilling. But if you don't know who you are, and you don't know what's going to challenge and engage you or give you purpose, then all of those things are going to feel a little bit out of reach. Or you're going to have the feeling, which I experienced up until I discovered who I was, which was at 35, which is that I'm checking all of these boxes. I'm doing what I thought I was supposed to do in order to have all of these things, and yet I don't feel them. Something is missing. And I'm confused by this because, I'm working with the top companies. I am doing, I got married at 28. I am doing all the things that you're supposed to do. And yet there was always something missing. And that's a sign that you're not connected to yourself.
Yes, yes. Um,
Because
Definitely.
it's only through connecting to yourself and knowing yourself that you can create and understand the right version of all of those things for you. And in absence of that right version for yourself, you're going to default to what others have told you. And so the reason for that disconnect is that you're creating success, relationships, or a career that is right for other people and not necessarily right for you, and without even knowing it.
Yes. That is so yes, and I love what you said. In absence of a connection to yourself, then you do what others expect of you. You're living other people's lives, basically.
Yes.
And then it's so and what you mentioned that really hit home. You mentioned something about how you get to that place where you have everything, or you've achieved everything that you thought you wanted, and
Mhm.
you honestly probably thought you wanted it, but it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel right, and then it's so confusing when you hit that place. um
Yes,
and it sounds like the
because you're
reason is
doing
because
something someone else told you to do,
it wasn't
or you're
yours.
doing something that society has somehow condoned or influenced or taught you that is right. And then again, once again, without kind of going through the practice of knowing yourself and getting connected to yourself, then you're going again to default to what you've heard, what your parents have done, what your peers are doing. So yeah, that moment of disconnect in many ways actually should be a huge celebration, because it's a calling, it's an opportunity to do something different. And to go back to the original question, which is why isn't this taught? I don't know. I would love to change that.
Yeah.
I think, that's one of the visions with this work and my life is to reach people at all levels, but even to kind of start talking to people about this at the high school level or my daughter is 4. I'm going to be talking to her about it. We're starting to talk about these things now, but I think the earlier, uh, individuals or people can learn that knowing who they are is just so fundamental to everything, the better.
Yes, that's a great segue into my next question. Is like, what are you currently working on right now, Laura? Because I know you wrote this book like 4 years ago, so like
Yes.
I'm sure a lot has happened since then. Like, what's going on now, and what are you looking forward to?
It is, I find through living and doing this work and continually, committing my life to it, that there's so many layers. And, I think for me personally, my first big area of optimization of, learning who I was and optimizing that was career. And that will always be the case, and this is one of the things that I talk about in the Genius Habit, and I'll be talking about it more, is that this is a new habit. This is a way of living. It's not something that you just stop doing, which is becoming aware and pivoting and optimizing and figuring out ways to be more of who you are. So, career, I'm always doing that. I think for me right now, what is so interesting is focusing on how to be who I am in a romantic relationship, and also how to parent my child to be who she is. So those are two areas where I'm really excited about, and I see, interestingly, it's kind of surprising and not surprising that being who you are in different aspects of life is harder. Each one has its own challenges, and I think in a romantic relationship, in particular, I'm finding that is the hardest. So recently, I uncoupled in a relationship, and I am now committed to, and I've learned so much about myself as a result of that uncoupling process. And I'm really, focused on building a body of work around helping people be who they are in their relationship. But interestingly, it's the same exact work, it's the same methodology, it's the same process. Because what I'm finding is that just like in career, in a relationship, more often than not, a lot of what's happening is unconscious. There's a lot of clarity that's missing in the relationship space and in relationships, meaning you think one thing is happening, but there's actually a lot of other stuff going on. So that's part of something that I'm really focused on right now.
I love that. I love that. It really does sound like your work is something that grows with you. Like it's an extension of you. Like as
Well,
you're
you start to
growing.
realize as you become an expert at being who you are, you start to notice the ways in which you're not being who you are becomes more obvious, whereas before it was completely subtle. So it can be in every aspect of your life. And for me, romantic relationships is a big one, but also I bought a house last year. That whole process was also one where I really had to think, wow, and when you buy a house, you have to really be connected to yourself as well. There's so many ways that you can get pulled and directed by others. If you're not clear on what it is you want and what's right for you, you're going to end up with something vastly different. So there's so many different, and I think each aspect of life again comes with its own kind of unique challenges, and that I think is an area where obviously the next book will be focused on the career and all of these other areas as well.
I love it. I love that. And it's really fascinating what you said about how like the same things that show up in your work, finding yourself in your work, it actually it's the same thing that shows up in relationships. And
Exactly.
yeah,
It
that's
can just feel harder because it's only in romantic relationships where you recreate the dynamic, the parent child dynamic. That's why it's kind of its own unique universe. Besides, of course, engaging directly with your parents, like your actual parents, in a romantic relationship, you're recreating that relationship.
yes.
So, being who you are, um, you're going to show up to your romantic partner in the way that you did to your parents. And that is often very different than how you might show up in a friend in a relationship. And so, therefore, the romantic relationship dynamic is so fertile for growth. If you can change, you can really be who you are in that dynamic, then it's much easier to be who you are in every other aspect of life. So I find for myself, the fact that I've spent so many years focused on that in my career, it's not necessarily making it that much easier in the relationship space, but I'm very comfortable with the process. But the realizations, the insights, and the growth is just super exciting because I find nothing more invigorating than learning things about myself that I didn't realize was happening, but it's actually happening.
Love it.
So that's definitely something that gets me very excited.
Love it. On that note, what are your current struggles right now with being who you are in life? As you mentioned, it's kind of like a peeling the onion exercise where there's always a layer and layer to go and at this ever evolving journey.
Yeah, well, I've been exploring the concept of intimacy a lot because what I have found, and I think this is actually true for anyone of my generation. I'm Gen X, and I'm a child of parents that were emotionally immature. And what that means is that um, their needs were often more important than my needs when it comes to emotions. And therefore, emotional intimacy is a real challenge for me. And I think it is for a lot of people. And so but ultimately, intimacy it's kind of the graduate level degree of being who you are. So I'm graduating to that. And I find intimacy as a concept so fascinating. It's very similar to this concept of purpose. People use the word intimacy all the time. Sometimes people can think of it as sex, but when I'm talking about it, it's emotional intimacy. It's deep connection with another person in a romantic relationship. And so there's a lot of question marks and unknowns around that in the same way it is with purpose. Most people would say, yeah, sure, I want intimacy with my partner. I want emotional intimacy. But most of the time they're saying that and they don't even understand what it is because you have to have had it modeled to you by your parents in order for you to know how to do it. And again, with my generation and looking at the generations that came before me, emotional intimacy was not it was not understood. It was not modeled. It actually very rarely existed. So I think there is a tremendous amount of people that just don't even understand what that is. And that's what that's like, I wouldn't say the word struggle is probably right. I would say I'm diving deep into it. And I'm really excited about what I'm finding because it is actually a very simple thing, but does require the same kind of habit as being who you are at work. It requires deeply understanding yourself and making that commitment to being exactly who you are in the most vulnerable space, which is to your parents, which i.e. romantic relationships.
Yes, yes. I It's so interesting you brought up the word emotionally immature parents. I recently found a book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. I don't
Mm.
know if you've seen that. And
There was a book I read. It
it's
was
like,
called, and that might be it. Who
uh,
was the author? Do you remember?
I don't I don't remember the author. I just remember the book title because of that phrase, emotionally immature parents. And
Yes.
I did read through it, and I was like, it talked about very similar things to what you just talked about. And
Yes.
I think what you said here, it's not something that people think about, which is like your relationship with your parents. I do agree, or whatever your adult figure is when you were younger. Like it has such a formative role in your development of beliefs and how you interact with others. Um, and that I would love, like, I'm so looking forward to hearing what your learnings are in this space and what you have to offer as you continue your exploration.
Yeah, well, there will
Yeah,
be a methodology and there will
yes.
be, I mean, the methodology is already there, tracking, and it's a way of, the genius habit is a habit of building awareness, understanding, and clarity, and then being able to create what it is you want. And so that's exactly how I will be tackling intimacy in romantic relationships, or, it's essentially being who you are in a romantic relationship. But there will be similar to, um, there's a relationship clarity tracker that you can actually download already. But there will be, as I work with people on this, it's going to be a practice and a habit that I will be developing specifically related to intimacy. And I think even that word to some people sends like shivers down their back because, and again, Brene Brown has done so much work with this because being vulnerable is really, really hard. Really, truly speaking what you feel and what you're thinking is something that very, very few people do because it is really hard, because you're not used to to having it received without any sort of emotional react like harsh reaction. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm so that's the relationship clarity tracker.
Yeah.
And before we end, Laura, this has been really insightful. Anything you want to share with our audience who are interested in what else you have to offer?
Sure. Well, I mean, right now, anyone. I think the first thing, we haven't spoken about this, which I think any listener, this would help them right away, which is to go to the Zone of Genius quiz. That is one thing that I developed actually after the Genius Habit came out. So there's a quiz now that you can take to understand your genius and your purpose and core emotional challenge, which, as we've talked about today, is data everyone should know about themselves. It will change your life. So go to the zoneofgeniusquiz.com and take the quiz. And then, what I would say too, if you're really determined and you want to begin building the genius habit, whether that's in your career or get more clarity in your relationship, go to the trackers. It's the tools tab on lauragarnett.com and download the tracker, because that will help you begin to get insight into the unconscious ways or unconscious behavior habits that are holding you back from truly being who you are, or even experiencing the kind of success and the kind of joy that you really want in all of these areas of life. So that's what people you can go to right now. And also, I would say, Lucy, I know you were on my newsletter. Join the newsletter. I send out one every 3 weeks. And that's really a place where I'm kind of sharing the latest and the greatest in terms of my thinking or how the work is evolving. And as a part of my newsletter, you also get, kind of the first peek into any new products or any new services as well. So I would encourage you to go to lauragarnett.com and just join the newsletter.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. And I will include all of those links in the show notes below. And where can our audience find you? You mentioned lauragarnett.com. Is that the best place?
Yes, I would say so. That's the best place. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Instagram. Laura Garnett 1, I think, is my Instagram handle. So absolutely, those are the places where you can find me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Laura, for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun.